You look like nobody sees you,
Why would you help a stranger?
because being poor doesn't make you worthless.
You have no idea who I am.
Choose that homeless man, or leave my house. Was I ever your daughter? I raised you because I had to. Who are you?
Andrew Bancroft. I own Bancroft Capital.
So being homeless was a lie?
The disguise was. Loving you wasn't.
She had $6 left in her wallet and a 20-minute walk home in the November wind. She saw him on the bench near the Riverwalk, not sleeping, not begging, just sitting very still, like a man waiting for something he no longer expected to arrive. She bought him a granola bar and a coffee from the cart nearby. He thanked her like she'd handed him something far more valuable than food. Around her, 300 people walked past without looking down. She was a nursing student on a scholarship she nearly lost last semester, and she had just spent her dinner money on a stranger. She didn't regret it for a second. Welcome to today's story. If you enjoy emotional drama and shocking twists, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more unforgettable stories. And before we begin, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. The evening it started was an ordinary Tuesday, the kind that doesn't announce itself as anything. Megan Hayes had finished her last lecture at 7:45, stood in the cold outside the building for a moment longer than necessary, and then started walking toward the Riverwalk because the bus would be crowded, and she needed a few minutes where no one expected anything from her. She had an anatomy exam Thursday, a shift at the coffee shop Friday morning at 5, and a text from Carol waiting on her phone that she hadn't opened yet. She knew what it would say. Something about the gas bill, or the state of the kitchen, or how Megan had left the hall light on again. She walked with her head down, hands in her jacket pockets, breath fogging in front of her. Chicago in November was not gentle. The wind off the lake had a mean quality to it, the kind that found gaps in your clothing on purpose. She almost didn't see him. He was sitting on one of the public benches near the water, not slumped, not passed out, not performing the particular exhaustion that Megan had seen in people who had learned how to make strangers feel guilty enough to give them something. He was just sitting, upright, hands resting on his knees, looking out at the water with the focused stillness of someone doing something that required concentration. She slowed. There was a food cart 30 feet back, still open. She had $6 in her wallet, the last of what she'd budgeted for the week, after splitting her last paycheck between her own expenses and the household's gas bill. She looked at the man on the bench. She looked back at the cart. She did the calculation quickly and in a way she wouldn't have been able to fully defend if someone had asked her to. She walked back to the cart, bought a granola bar and the smallest coffee they had, and carried them over. "Excuse me," she said. He looked up. He was somewhere in his early 30s, she guessed. Dark hair, a few days of stubble, wearing a jacket that had seen better seasons. His eyes were steady in a way that she didn't entirely know how to place. Not desperate, not blunted, just present. "I thought you might want something warm," she said, and held out the coffee. He looked at it for a moment. Then he took it with both hands, carefully, the way people handled things they intended to keep safe. "Thank you," he said. The two words came out like they meant something specific. She handed him the granola bar, too. He accepted it. She stayed for a moment, not quite sure what the polite protocol was for handing food to a stranger on a bench, whether to leave immediately or to acknowledge the interaction beyond the transaction. "Do you have somewhere to sleep tonight?" she asked. It wasn't the most graceful question, but she had never been particularly strategic about that kind of thing. "I'll be okay," he said. She noticed he hadn't said yes. "There's a shelter on West Harrison," she said. "They have open intake after 8. I don't know if you knew." He looked at her for a second, a careful, unhurried look, and said, "Thank you. I'll keep that in mind." She nodded. She started to walk away, and then stopped and said, "I'm Drew," he said. She nodded again and walked and spent the next 4 blocks thinking about the way he had said thank you, not effusively, not with the practiced gratitudes of fun performing for a potential donor, but like the words were exact and she had done something worth being exact about. The text from Carol was about the kitchen. Megan read it on the bus and put her phone back in her pocket. The apartment was warm when she got home, which was something. Jessica was in the kitchen doing something with her phone and a glass of wine, and Ryan was on the couch with the television on at a volume that suggested he'd fallen asleep to it. Carol was at the kitchen table with a stack of papers that she moved to indicate she had been working on something important. "You're late," Carol said. Lecture ran over. It hadn't, by much, but the Riverwalk detour wasn't worth explaining. "There are dishes in the sink. I'll do them in the morning before my shift." Megan set her bag down and went to the refrigerator. Jessica looked up from her phone with the particular expression she reserved for moments when something was about to be funnier at Megan's expense than it was otherwise. "How was your field trip? Save anyone today?" Megan pulled out leftover rice and didn't answer. "I'm just asking," Jessica said. "You had that look when you came in." "The charity look. I don't have a look." "You absolutely have a look." Jessica set her phone down and leaned against the counter with the posture of someone preparing to be entertained. "Who was it this time? Please tell me it was someone dramatic." "I gave coffee to a man sitting by the Riverwalk." "That's it." Carol looked up from her papers. "You gave away money," Carol said. "It wasn't a question." $6. Megan kept her voice even, which is less than what I saved on the bus by walking. That is not the point. Carol's voice had the particular quality it took on when she was about to give a version of a speech she'd given before. "You are on a scholarship that barely covers your tuition. You work double shifts twice a week. You have no financial cushion, Megan, none, and you are out there handing cash to strangers. It was coffee and a granola bar. It's the principle." Carol set her papers down. "There are organizations for people like that. Shelters, programs. That is not your responsibility. I know it's not my responsibility. I wanted to do it. You always want to do it." There was a flatness in Carol's voice now, the kind that came after exasperation had run its course and reached something colder. "That's what worries me." Ryan changed the channel on the television. Jessica went back to her phone. Megan finished heating her rice, and Aunt standing at the counter because sitting down felt like it would extend the conversation. She went to her room at 10 and lay on her bed and thought about the man on the bench. Not the way she thought about things that were problems, more the way she thought about things that didn't fit neatly into the categories she already had. He had said thank you like it meant something specific. He had told her he'd be okay and hadn't said where. His eyes had been steady in a way that didn't match the bench, or the jacket, or the particular emptiness of a cold Tuesday in November. She fell asleep without opening her anatomy notes. She didn't know yet that she would see him again. She didn't know any of what came after. But she lay there in the dark of her room in a house where she had always been just slightly outside the frame, and for the first time in a long time, she felt like she had done something that made complete sense. She didn't go back the next day. She had a shift at 6 in the morning and an exam review session at noon, and there was nothing logical about stopping at the Riverwalk on the way to either one. She didn't go back the day after that, either, because it rained. On Thursday morning, she took the longer route to the library without fully deciding to, and he was there, not on the same bench. A different one slightly further along the walk, closer to where the food carts clustered near the pedestrian bridge. He was sitting with a paperback open in his lap, which she found unexpected, and he looked up before she reached him like he had noticed her approach from a distance and waited to see what she'd do. "You're back," he said. "I walk this way sometimes," she said, which was only technically true. He looked like he understood the distinction but wasn't going to press it. He closed the book, she caught the spine, something by a historian she'd had assigned in a class, and moved slightly on the bench in the way that wasn't quite reaching but was close enough to read as one, if you wanted to. She sat. The river was gray in the morning light, moving fast with the recent rain, and there were joggers going past at intervals, and pigeons working the area near the carts with professional focus. It was cold, but not viciously so, the wind coming in short gusts instead of the sustained assault it had managed Tuesday. "Did you end up going to the shelter?" she asked. "I found somewhere," he said. She let that go. It wasn't her business. "Where are you from originally?" she asked instead. It was the kind of question she asked when she was genuinely curious about someone, which she was aware was not universal. He considered it for a second, a pause that she registered as slightly longer than the question warranted. Milwaukee, mostly. I moved around a lot. I was in the foster system until I was 18, then I aged out. She nodded. Did you have family around here? Not really. He said it simply, without performing the tragedy of it. I came to Chicago about 8 months ago thinking there'd be more work. There is more work, in theory, just not the kind I can get without credentials. What kind of work did you do? Anything physical? Loading, delivery, construction day labor. I got consistent work for a few months, but then the crew I was with folded and I've been patchy since. He paused. I'm not asking for anything, just so you know. You don't have to keep feeding me to be a decent person. You've already established that. She looked at him. I know I don't have to. Okay, he said. They sat for a minute, without talking. One of the food cart operators was setting up the morning service, and the smell of coffee drifted over, and Megan thought about her exam and the laundry she hadn't done, and the anatomy notes she still needed to finish, and said, Are you working on anything right now? Any lead on day labor? There's a site in the West Loop that might need people next week. I talked to the foreman. He said to come back. That sounds real. We'll see. He didn't say it bitterly, just with the particular calibration of someone who had learned not to weight a possibility too heavily until it became a fact. She noticed his hands when he opened the book again briefly to find his page. They were clean in a way that wasn't entirely consistent with a man doing construction day labor and sleeping in uncertain places. Not soft exactly. She didn't think soft was quite right, but the kind of hands where the cleanliness seemed deliberate. The nails were trimmed. She filed it in the back of her mind in the same category as his vocabulary and the way he held still. She had to get to the library. She reached into her jacket pocket and found the crumpled transit card she kept as backup. Here, she said. It has about $8 loaded on it. I keep it as emergency. He looked at it and didn't move to take it. I have a regular card, she said. I'm not stranding myself, you should keep it, he said. I'm offering it, she said, and set it on the bench between them. He looked at it for another second and then picked it up with the same care he'd used with the coffee. I'll pay it back, he said. You really don't have to. I know, he said. I'll still do it. She stood to go, pulling her bag up on one shoulder. My name is Megan, in case you forgot. I didn't forget, he said. Drew, I know. She started walking. After a few steps, she turned back, not entirely meaning to. He had opened the book again and was reading the transit card on the bench beside him. He looked like someone comfortable with being alone in a crowd. She turned back around and kept walking. On the bus to the library, she thought about the word credentials and how specifically he'd used it. Not experience or references, but credentials and the historian's book, and the way he'd said he'd pay the card back as though it were a point of honor rather than a social nicety. She thought about these things without exactly knowing why she was cataloging them. She just was. The house that evening was operating at a different frequency than usual. Carol had cleared the table, and there were candles out, which only happened when Carol wanted something to look a certain way. Jessica was in her room, and there was the sound of a conversation through the door. Careful, rehearsed sounding, and Ryan was in the kitchen eating cereal with the air of someone who had been excluded from a meeting and was fine with it. What's happening? Megan asked him. Chad's coming for dinner Saturday, Ryan said. Carol's been planning it for 3 days. Who is Chad? Jessica's boyfriend, the venture capital guy. Ryan said venture capital the way you say a phrase in a foreign language that you can read but not fully pronounce. Carol thinks he's going to propose within the year. Megan set her bag down. What do you know about him? Ryan shrugged. Jessica met him at a rooftop event 2 months ago. He says he runs a fund. Carol looked him up and found a LinkedIn. That's it? A LinkedIn? That was enough for Carol. Megan stood at the counter and thought about that. A LinkedIn was not a fund. A fund had filings, a track record, names of limited partners. A fund could be looked up. She had looked up enough things in her financial literacy class to know that the absence of a paper trail where there should be one was not neutral information. She went to the kitchen doorway, where Carol was arranging flowers from a corner store. I just want to mention something about Saturday, Megan said. Carol looked up with the mild, preemptive irritation she deployed when Megan was about to say something that conflicted with a plan in progress. I was just wondering if anyone's looked into Chad's fund specifically, not just the LinkedIn. There are regulatory databases. The SEC has public filings for investment advisors. And if his fund isn't registered, Megan, Carol said. I'm not saying anything definitive. I'm just saying it might be worth. Chad is a successful professional in a competitive field, Carol said with the finality of someone closing a door. Jessica has been happier in the last 2 months than she has been in years. I am not going to have you planting doubts because you read something somewhere about financial regulation. I haven't read anything specific. Enough. Carol turned back to the flowers. Please don't ruin Saturday before it's even started. Megan went to her room. She sat on the edge of her bed and opened her laptop and typed in the name Jessica had mentioned to Ryan, Chad Weston, Chicago Venture Capital, and found the LinkedIn and found a company website that looked like it had been built in an afternoon, and found no SEC registration, no ADV filing, no record in FINRA's database. This was not, on its own, proof of anything. Private funds under certain thresholds didn't always have to register. But the absence of anything verifiable beyond a well-formatted website sat in her chest with the specific weight of something she wished she could put down. She closed the laptop and went back to her anatomy notes. She thought, briefly, about Drew on the bench with his historian's book, saying, I'll pay it back like a promise rather than a pleasantry. Whatever he was or wasn't, he was the most straightforwardly honest person she had talked to this week. She wasn't sure what that said about the week. She suspected it said something. Saturday came with the specific tension of a performance, with an audience of 3, Carol directing, Jessica rehearsing, Ryan absent by strategic design. He had made plans to be somewhere else and mentioned them twice at dinner the night before, which Megan recognized as the particular announcement of someone who had learned that claiming prior obligations was easier than explaining a preference. Megan had a shift until 2 in the afternoon, and when she came home the apartment had been cleaned in the way it never was. The kind of cleaning that was for someone outside the family, where surfaces were wiped and things were moved to the edges of rooms, and there was a candle lit in the entryway that had come out of the closet specifically for this. Chad Weston arrived at 6. He was tall, good-looking in the polished way of someone who had decided early what image he wanted to project and had invested in it consistently. His jacket was well-fitted. His handshake was the straightest kind, firm, held a second longer than strictly necessary, with eye contact deployed as a statement. He brought wine that he described, briefly, as something he'd been holding on to. Carol received him like a verdict she had been waiting on for a long time. Dinner was fine. The food was fine. Carol had ordered most of it from a restaurant down the street and plated it in her own dishes, which Megan found both reasonable and mildly interesting. Chad talked about his fund in a way that was smooth and not particularly specific. International exposure, diversified asset class, strong Q3. Jessica watched him with the focused attention of someone who had prepared questions and was waiting for her cue. Carol laughed at things that were not quite jokes. Megan ate and said very little, which was not unusual. At some point, Carol said, Megan's studying pre-nursing, in the tone that was meant to be contextualizing, not proud, just locating, and Chad said, Nursing? Great. There's always work in healthcare, in the tone of someone who had said that exact sentence before and didn't know there was a difference between saying it and meaning it. After dinner, while Carol and Chad were in the living room discussing something with the studied leisure of people who had agreed the evening was going well, Megan went to the kitchen to start on the dishes, and Jessica came in to refill her wine. He likes me, Jessica said, not to Megan specifically, more to the room. He seems like he does, Megan said. Carol thinks he's going to ask me to move in by the new year. Jessica said it with a particular satisfaction, not quite happiness, more the satisfaction of a plan proceeding on schedule. Megan washed a plate. She thought about the website that had looked like it was built in an afternoon. She thought about Carol's face when she'd tried to raise it. She thought about the way Chad had said diversified asset class without being asked, which was not what people who ran legitimate funds typically led with when the question hadn't been posed. "Jessica," she said, "I know what you're going to say. I just want to make sure, Megan." Jessica set down her glass. Her voice had dropped to the particular tone she used when she wanted to be direct without raising her voice, which she had learned from Carol. "I know you've been looking things up." Carol told me, "I don't need your due diligence. I need you to stay out of it." "I'm not trying to. You're always trying to protect someone who didn't ask for it. It's what you do. It's the whole thing with the guy by the river. It's every charity situation. It's all of it." Jessica picked up her glass. "I'm a grown woman making decisions about my own life. Please let me." She went back to the living room. Megan dried the plate and put it away, and did the rest of the dishes in the quiet of the kitchen, listening to the sound of Carol laughing at something Chad had said. It was the particular laugh Carol used for people she was trying to impress. Lighter than her regular laugh, more surprised sounding, as though whatever had been said was unexpectedly clever. The filing cabinet was in the hallway between the kitchen and Carol's room. Megan walked past it on her way to get more dish soap from the pantry, and she stopped. She had found the envelope there 3 weeks ago. She had put it back without opening it. It was addressed in a handwriting she didn't recognize. Her name, the address of the apartment, no return address, a postmark from 6 years earlier. She had told herself it was probably something bureaucratic. A notification from a college program she'd applied for. Something from a scholarship administrator. She opened the filing cabinet and found the envelope where she had left it, at the back of the second drawer, behind the utility folders. She picked it up. From the living room, Carol laughed again, and someone, Chad, probably, said something about a market trend. Megan looked at the envelope for a moment. Then she put it in her jacket pocket and went back to the kitchen. She didn't open it that night. She kept it in her jacket pocket on Sunday while she studied, and Monday while she worked, and Tuesday morning when she took the longer route to the library. Drew was there, on a bench about 30 feet from the water. He looked up when she came around the corner. "I still have the transit card," he said. "I know you do." She sat. "Did the West Loop job come through?" It did. 3 days last week. Something in his posture was slightly easier than it had been. Not relaxed. She didn't think he was ever fully relaxed, but less held. That's good. She had her bag on her lap, and without quite thinking about it, she reached in and put her hand on the envelope. She didn't take it out. "Are you from Chicago originally? Before Milwaukee?" He glanced at her sideways. "Why? You said Milwaukee like it was a fact, but the other day you mentioned Wicker Park like you'd walked it." "Milwaukee is 3 hours north. You'd have to have been here before to know the specific blocks." A pause, shorter than the ones that preceded other things she'd noticed. "I visited once," he said, "when I was younger." She nodded and let it go, because he'd answered her, and she had no reason to press it, and because she was not actually chirrused what she was looking for when she asked. She was just paying attention. It was what she did when she found someone interesting, and she found Drew interesting in a way she couldn't quite name yet. She stayed 20 minutes, and then she had to go, and she walked to the library with the envelope still in her jacket pocket and the specific sensation of being in the middle of something she hadn't yet decided to investigate. She put the envelope on her desk at home that night without opening it. She went to bed. It sat there in the lamplight, her own name written on the front in someone else's hand, and she looked at it for a long time before she turned off the light. She found him on a Thursday afternoon, and he was on the ground. She had gone to the Riverwalk after her anatomy exam, not to find him, specifically, just to walk and let the exam decompress out of her, the way she'd learned to use a change of location to clear her head. She came around the bend near the pedestrian underpass, where the walk dipped below a bridge, and she saw him sitting with his back against the concrete pillar, one hand pressed to his ribs, jacket torn at the shoulder. She ran. Drew. She crouched in front of him. His lip was split, there was blood drying on his chin, and his left eye had the early purple of something that was going to look worse in the morning. "What happened?" "I'm fine," he said. It was the automatic answer of someone who had been using it for a long time. "You're clearly not." "What happened?" He breathed carefully. There's a group that camps under the Wabash Bridge. I've been sleeping near the underpass on the other side. They came by this morning and said I was on their side and needed to move. I said I would. They decided to help the process along. How many? 3. The ribs might be bruised. I don't think anything's cracked. She pulled out her phone. I'm calling a rideshare. Megan, you need to be looked at. She was already typing. There's an urgent care on West Randolph that's open until 10. I'm taking you there. I know, she said. Please don't finish that sentence. The rideshare took 6 minutes. She helped him up carefully, one hand on his arm, and he stood with a controlled movement that told her he was managing pain rather than absent of it. In the car, she called ahead to the urgent care and gave them a short summary, and the driver to his credit said nothing and drove without commentary. At urgent care, the desk nurse asked for insurance, and Drew said he didn't have it, and there was a brief pause in which Megan said she would cover the visit on her credit card, and could they please start the intake. The nurse nodded and handed her a clipboard. Drew sat in the intake chair and let the nurse take his vitals and said the right things in response to the questions. Yes, blunt force trauma. Yes, I can rate the pain. No history of cardiac events. And Megan filled out what she could on the forms and left the rest blank. She sat across from him in the waiting area. He had his hands on his knees and his eyes open, watching the middle distance with that composed attention that she had stopped trying to categorize. His jacket was on the chair beside him, and she could see, now that she was looking, that his shirt was not quite right for his cover story either. The fabric was fine enough that it had survived being slept in and attacked, and it still fell well. She filed it in the same back drawer with everything else. You didn't have to come with me, he said. I know. I've handled injuries before without Drew. She looked at him directly. I found you sitting against a concrete pillar with blood on your face. Let me do this. He was quiet for a moment. Okay, he said. The word had the weight of something that cost him something to say. The doctor, a young attending with efficient hands and a practical manner, confirmed 2 bruised ribs, a split lip that needed cleaning but no stitches, and the beginning of a black eye that would fully develop over the next 24 hours. She told him no strenuous exertion for a week, rest as much as possible, follow-up if breathing became difficult. He needs somewhere to recover, Megan said to the doctor, in the particular tone she used when she was asking for confirmation rather than permission. He really shouldn't be, the doctor started. I know, Megan said. I'm taking him somewhere. She settled the bill at the front desk, $380 on her credit card, which brought her available balance down to a number she was going to have to solve in the next 2 weeks, and went back to where Drew was waiting. You paid, he said. I'll add it to the tab. He looked at her with that specific unguarded expression she'd seen once or twice before. Not gratitude, something more complicated than gratitude. Like someone watching something unexpected from a distance and not being quite sure how to account for it. While she was waiting for the discharge papers, she moved slightly to check that he was settled, and his jacket, folded over the chair, shifted, and his phone slid partially out of the interior pocket. The screen was facing up, lit briefly from an incoming notification. She wasn't trying to read it, but the screen was bright and the contact name was there before she could look away. Bancroft Group, legal. She looked at it for maybe a second. Then she looked back at the wall across from her and kept her face neutral. She didn't ask, she had no reason to ask, and she wasn't the kind of person who asked a thing specifically, because she'd just seen something she hadn't been meant to see. But it sat in her mind with the precise density of something being set down very carefully next to all the other things that didn't quite fit. In the rideshare back across the city, she made the decision. She had been holding it in the background for 10 minutes, running the logic. She had no money left for emergencies. She had an anatomy exam she needed to study for tomorrow. Her credit card was nearly maxed. The house was going to be difficult, possibly very difficult. You're coming home with me, she said, just until you can move without wincing. I'm not asking, she said. I'm telling you. You can argue about it tomorrow when you can take a full breath. He didn't argue. She sat in the rideshare, watching Chicago go past through the window, and didn't let herself think too hard about what happened next. She would deal with Carol when she got there. She was good at dealing with Carol. She'd had 20 years of practice. What she didn't know yet was that Carol, tonight, was going to give her something she couldn't deal with at all. Carol was in the kitchen when they came in. She heard the door and came to the hallway, and her eyes went from Megan to Drew, in his torn jacket, with the blooming bruise around his eye and the dried blood at his lip, and her face went through several things in fast succession before settling on the version it wanted. "No," she said. "No, Megan, absolutely not. He was attacked. He needs somewhere to recover for 2 days." Megan kept her voice measured. She had decided in the rideshare that measured was the right register. "He can take the spare room. He is not staying in this house." Carol's voice was tight in the way it got when she was controlling a larger response. "I don't know who he is. I don't know anything about him." "You can't. He's someone I know. He's been hurt. He's staying." Megan turned to Drew. "The spare room is the second door on the left." Drew looked at Carol once. A brief, measured look that said nothing and committed to nothing, and then went down the hallway. Carol waited until the door closed. "Have you completely lost your mind?" she said. "No. You brought a stranger into this house. A homeless man you met on the street, who you have known for, 3 weeks? And you've brought him here without asking anyone. I'm asking you now. You're telling me now." Carol's voice rose slightly. "There's a difference, Megan. There is a very large difference. This is my house." Jessica appeared in the kitchen doorway with her phone in her hand, the specific alert posture she took when something was happening that might be interesting later. Ryan was not home. "I'm covering 30% of this house's expenses," Megan said, and she said it simply, without anger, which was somehow more pointed than anger would have been. "I have been for 2 years. I'm asking for 2 days of the spare room." The kitchen was quiet for a moment. "That has nothing to do with this," Carol said. "I think it has something to do with it." Carol set down the dish towel in her hand with deliberate care. "You want to talk about contributions? Let's talk about contributions. You came here with nothing, Megan. No resources, no standing, no claim on anything in this house. Everything you have here I gave you." Megan looked at her. "I gave you a room," Carol said. "I fed you. I sent you to school. I did all of it without being asked. You also never let me forget it," Megan said. "Because you never seemed to understand the weight of it." Carol's voice was quieter now, and somehow that was worse. "You walk around this house acting like your instincts are always right, like your judgment is better than everyone else's, like kindness is some kind of currency that entitles you to. I'm not acting like anything. I'm trying to help someone who was hurt. You are not this man's family," Carol said. "You are not his anything. You met him on a bench. He is a stranger who you have been romanticizing because the idea of saving someone makes you feel like you matter." The word landed. Megan stood very still. "I'm going to say something to you," Carol said, "that I have been putting off saying for a long time, because I thought it would be kinder not to. But you keep pushing, Megan, and I need you to understand something fundamental about where you stand." "Don't," Megan said. She didn't know exactly what was coming, but something in Carol's posture told her it was real. "You are not my biological daughter." The kitchen was completely quiet. "Your biological parents were your father's brother and his wife. They died in a car accident on the I-55 when you were 4 years old." Carol said it in the particular flat tone of someone who had rehearsed the information enough times that the emotional content had been ironed out. "Your father asked me to take you in. He was sick by then and he knew it. I was going to be a widow anyway. I said yes, because it was the right thing to do." She paused. "I tried, Megan. I want you to know I did try. But you were never quite mine. I never fully saw you as my own, and I have been living with that for 20 years. Megan looked at the linoleum floor, then at the window, then at Carol. 20 years of small coldnesses, of photographs she wasn't in, of birthdays that felt different than Jessica's birthdays, of the particular way Carol looked at her when she did something that Jessica also did, with a flicker of distance that she had always told herself she was imagining. She hadn't been imagining it. She went to the hallway and opened the filing cabinet drawer and took out the envelope and came back. She set it on the counter. "What is this?" she said. Carol looked at it. Something moved in her face. "It came 6 years ago. It's addressed to me, and it's not from you." Silence. "There's an attorney's name in the return address," Megan said. She knew because she'd looked at the envelope every night for a week. "I haven't opened it." "You should open it," Carol said quietly. "Tell me what's in it first." Another pause. "Your father's brother, your biological father, had a small estate. There was a trust set up. The attorney reached out to locate you when you turned 18. Carol looked at the envelope. "I filed it. I thought it would confuse things. You kept it from me. You were 19 when it arrived. You were in school. I didn't want to." "You kept it from me," Megan said again. Carol said nothing. Megan picked up the envelope and put it back in her jacket. She went to the spare room and knocked once and went in. Drew was sitting on the edge of the bed. He looked at her face and didn't say anything. "I'm going to need to leave this house," she said. "Not tonight. Tonight you need to stay still, but after this." "I need to go." "Okay," he said. "I don't have a plan yet. That's okay too." She sat on the chair by the window and looked at the street for a while. "My stepmother just told me I was adopted." She said it plainly, like testing the weight of the sentence. 20 years of something that didn't add up, and now I know why. Drew was quiet. He wasn't performing sympathy, and he wasn't offering solutions. He just stayed there, which was the right thing. "I'm going to need 2 days to sort things out," she said. "Take whatever you need," he said. "I'm not going anywhere." Carol knocked on the door at 10:30 with the ultimatum: leave Drew and stay, or leave with him. She said it in the hallway in a controlled voice, with Jessica standing a few feet back, and she meant it the way people mean things they've said in their heads many times before they finally say them out loud. Megan looked at Carol for a long moment. She looked at Jessica, who was watching with an expression that was not quite satisfaction and not quite regret, something between the two. She went back into the spare room and picked up her bag. "We're leaving in the morning," she told Drew. "I heard," he said. She went back to her own room and took the things she needed: her school ID, her documents, a week of clothes, her laptop, the notes she needed for her exam, and she did it with the deliberate calm of someone who had run this calculation many times and had finally been given permission to follow through. Carol didn't come to her door again. In the morning, Megan carried one bag and her laptop case and walked out of the house where she had lived for 20 years. She didn't look back at the door. She didn't look at Carol, who was standing in the kitchen with her hands wrapped around a coffee cup. She walked out. Drew was beside her, moving carefully. She didn't know where she was going. She just knew it was away from here, and for the first time in a very long time, away felt like something that might become something better. They were sitting in a diner on West Lake Street, 4 hours after leaving the house, when Megan's phone rang. She had been eating a breakfast sandwich she hadn't particularly wanted, and doing triage in her head. She had $300 in her checking account. A credit card that was close to its limit, a friend from school named Clara, who had a couch and would let her crash without making it complicated, and an anatomy exam she'd somehow managed to sit through that morning and not entirely fail. Drew was across the table with a cup of coffee and his elbows on the table, looking at her with the careful attention of someone waiting for the next development. The number was a 312 area code she didn't recognize. She answered anyway. "Is this Megan Hayes?" A woman's voice, official sounding. "Yes. This is Officer Reyes, 2nd District. I'm calling regarding a Jessica Hayes. She's listed you as an emergency contact. She's currently being held for questioning at the station on South Michigan. I wanted to let you know she's safe, but we do need..." "I'll come," Megan said. Drew watched her. "Jessica," she said. "Police station. She's being held for questioning." "About what?" They didn't say. She was already calculating the rideshare. "I need to go." "I'll come with you," Drew said. She looked at him. She thought about his bruised ribs, the stairs at the station, the fact that he had absolutely no obligation to accompany her to deal with her family's latest crisis. And she said, "You really don't have to." "I know," he said. "I'm coming anyway." The station on South Michigan was the kind of building that managed to be both official and depressing simultaneously. Megan went to the desk, gave Jessica's name, explained the emergency contact situation, and was told to wait. She sat in one of the plastic chairs along the wall, her bag on her lap, and waited. 15 minutes later, Carol arrived. Megan had known she would. Jessica had probably called her the moment she was allowed to use a phone, which meant Carol had known about this before she'd called Megan, which meant either the officer had called both of them, or Jessica had done her own triage and decided both were necessary. Carol came through the front door in her good coat, the one she kept for situations where she needed to look composed, and she scanned the waiting area and found Megan, and her face did something complicated. Drew was standing near the entrance, just outside the main waiting area, far enough to be separate, close enough that she could see him. Carol walked directly to Megan without looking at Drew. "What did they tell you?" Carol said. "She's being held for questioning," Megan said. "That's all I know." Carol sat in the adjacent chair, which felt involuntary, like her legs made the decision before the rest of her caught up. She was holding her phone very tightly. "The officer I spoke to mentioned a name," Carol said quietly. "Chad." Begin said nothing. He was at the same party. He was taken in first. Carol's voice was thin. There was apparently she stopped, started exciting. There was apparently something with an investment scheme. Fraudulent documentation. "I know," Megan said. Carol looked at her. "I told you to look into him," Megan said. "It wasn't a rebuke, just a fact," said without anger. She didn't have the energy for anger right now. Carol's face went through something. She pressed her lips together and looked at the desk across the room. Then she turned back to Megan, and Megan saw her register Drew's presence for the first time, his bruised eye, the careful way he was standing, the fact that he was here at all in this place, where he had absolutely no obligation to be. And Carol's face changed again, not into warmth, but into something rawer than the composure she'd walked in with, and she said, loud enough that the two officers at the adjacent desk both looked up, "Don't think that because Ita called you, anything between us has changed. You are here as a contact, nothing more. You have no standing in this family, Megan. You made your choice last night, and so did I, and I will not have you acting like your presence here means something it doesn't." The officers were looking. A man in the row across was looking. Drew, from his position near the entrance, was completely still. Megan sat with her hands in her lap. "I came because Jessica needed someone to come," she said. Her voice was very even. "You came because you can't help yourself," Carol said. "You always have to be the person who shows up, even when no one wants you." One of the officers, a young woman, Reyes, the one who had called, said from the desk, "Ma'am," with the quiet emphasis of someone drawing a boundary professionally. Carol looked at the officer. Then she straightened in her chair and looked away from Megan. They sat in silence for 11 minutes. Jessica was brought out to the waiting area by a detective, and she looked pale and stunned in the way people look when a plan they trusted entirely has turned out to be made of paper. She saw Carol first and went to her, and then she saw Megan, and something crossed her face that wasn't gratitude exactly, but was adjacent to it. "You came," she said to Megan. "Yes," Megan said. "I didn't know if you would. I came." The detective explained that Jessica was not being charged. She was not a target of the investigation. She had not participated knowingly in any of Chad's activity, and she was free to go. She would likely be contacted by investigators as a potential witness given her relationship to the suspect. She should retain an attorney. Carol signed some paperwork. Jessica didn't say much on the way out. Megan held the door. Outside, on the steps of the station, the three of them stood in the cold for a moment. Carol had her arms crossed. Jessica was looking at her phone with the glazed attention of someone who didn't know what to look for. Drew came out and stood slightly apart from all of them. "I need to go," Megan said. "You're not coming home?" Carol said. No. Carol looked at her, then at Drew. Megan watched Carol calculating something behind her eyes, the evening, the situation, the balance of what had been said and what had been done. And then Carol said to Megan, in a voice that was almost quiet enough to be private, "This is what your choices lead to. I hope you understand that." "I'm starting to understand a lot of things," Megan said. She walked down the steps. Drew fell into step beside her. They walked half a block in silence before she stopped on the sidewalk and put her hands over her face for a moment. not crying, just holding herself still in the dark behind her palms. Drew stood beside her and said nothing. After a moment, she took her hands away. The night was cold and Chicago was doing what it always did, which was continuing without pause or comment. "There's something you need to know," Drew said. She looked at him. "I've been meaning to tell you for a while. I didn't because the timing kept being wrong, and then the timing got worse." He paused. He was looking at her with the same directness he always had, except that something in it had shifted, not less controlled, but differently weighted. Like something had been decided. "Okay," she said. "Not here," he said. "Can you walk?" She picked up her bag. "I can walk," she said. They walked north, and she didn't ask where they were going. And the city moved around them. And somewhere on Michigan Avenue, she thought, "Whatever this is, I am not going to flinch from it." She had not flinched from anything tonight, and she was tired, but she was not done. Whatever he was about to tell her, she was ready. She was almost certain that wasn't true. She was going anyway. The building was on East Delaware Place, in the Gold Coast, and it had a doorman. Megan walked through the lobby with her bag on her shoulder and her face expressionless, and the doorman said, "Mr. Bancroft," to Drew with the ease of long familiarity, and Drew said, "Good evening," Thomas in return, and Megan kept walking because stopping would require her to think about what she had just heard, and she wasn't ready to do that yet. The elevator was marble and very quiet. Drew stood beside her without speaking. The doors opened on the 14th floor, and there was a hallway and a single door at the end, and Drew opened it with a key. The apartment inside was the kind of space that had been built to be lived in seriously. Not a showroom, not a performance of wealth, but a place where someone actually spent their time, books on the shelves, in a way that suggested they'd been read and replaced by hand, a jacket on the back of a chair, a coffee mug on the kitchen counter, a window looking out at the city that was large enough to feel generous. Megan stood in the middle of the room. Drew closed the door behind them. "Sit down," he said. "Please, I'll get you water." She sat on the couch. He brought 2 glasses of water from the kitchen and sat in the armchair across from her, and he looked at her with the particular expression of someone who has been deciding when to say something for long enough that the decision itself has become its own kind of weight. "My name is Andrew Bancroft," he said. "Drew is what my family calls me. Andrew is what the business world calls me." He paused. "I run Bancroft Capital. We're a private equity firm based here in Chicago. My father and I built it over about 15 years. Megan held her water glass and said nothing. "I'm not homeless," he said. "I've never been in the foster system. My parents are alive, and they live in Lincoln Park." He said this carefully, without rushing, giving each fact its own moment. "I was living on the street, voluntarily, for about 6 weeks before you found me. I've been coming back to this apartment when I needed to, which is how I had a phone and clean clothes. I staged it. The jacket was borrowed from a prop house. The shoes were from a thrift store. The room was very quiet." "Why?" Megan said. He set his glass down. 18 months ago, I was in a relationship with a woman named Claire. She worked in media, and we met at a conference, and I liked her. She was smart. She was funny. I thought she genuinely cared about me. We were together for about 14 months. He said it simply, without performance. About 6 weeks before we ended, I found out she had been sharing information about a pending acquisition with a competitor. One of our portfolio companies was part of the deal. The information leak cost the target company the deal and cost us a significant amount in advisory fees. When I confronted her, she was unapologetic. She said she hadn't done anything technically illegal. She was probably right about that. And she said she'd assumed I knew the relationship came with certain expectations. Megan looked at him. "She was right that I should have seen it," he said. "I didn't, because I wanted to believe it was real. And after that I couldn't get back to a place where I was able to trust that. Anyone I dated from that point forward, I knew who I was before I shook hands with them. The context was always there, the money, the name, the firm. I didn't know how to get to something genuine from inside that. So you became homeless, my mother suggested it." A very brief pause. "That's not entirely a joke," she said. "If you can't trust anything from inside your own context, find a way outside of it." She was thinking more along the lines of a sabbatical or a travel year. I may have taken it further than she intended. Something almost happened with Megan's face. Not a smile. Close to one. I wasn't expecting you, he said. I want you to know that. I had met other people on the street. Some kind, some not, most just in a hurry. You were the first person who stopped without a visible calculation about whether stopping was worth it. You just stopped, he looked at his hands. And then you came back, and then you sat down, and I kept finding reasons to be in the same part of the city because... He stopped, started again. Because talking to you was the first time in a long time that I was in a conversation that didn't already know how it was supposed to end. The door opened. An older couple came in, the woman first, tall, silver-haired, with the unhurried movement of someone who was comfortable in the space. The man behind her, broader, with the same dark eyes as Drew. They both looked at Megan. "Mom," Drew said. "Dad, I didn't know you'd be stopping by." "We called ahead," Eleanor Bancroft said. She looked at Megan the way someone looks at a person they have been waiting to meet. "You must be Megan." She said it like it was a name she knew. "I am," Megan said. Eleanor sat on the other end of the couch from Megan with the directness of someone who was not going to pretend the situation was not unusual. "I know this is a great deal to absorb. I want you to know that whatever questions you have, we'll answer them. All of them." Marcus Bancroft stood by the armchair, his hands in his pockets, watching his son with the expression of a man who had been waiting to see how this particular chapter concluded. "He's talked about you," Eleanor said. Megan looked at Drew. He looked back at her without deflecting. "He hasn't said this much about another person in 3 years," Eleanor said. "I want you to know that because I think it matters. I'm not trying to tell you what to feel. I'm just telling you a fact." Megan held her water glass and looked at the window. The city was out there, going about its business, indifferent and enormous. She had walked out of her house this morning with a bag and no plan. She had sat through an exam at a police station and a public humiliation, and now she was in a Gold Coast penthouse being told the man she'd been bringing granola bars to was a CEO. She breathed. "I have questions," she said. "I know," Drew said. "Not tonight," she said. "Tonight I'm too tired, but tomorrow I have questions." "Tomorrow." He said. "All of them." Eleanor looked at Marcus. He gave a small nod that seemed to be about something they'd already discussed. "There's a guest room," Eleanor said to Megan. "At the end of the hall. You're welcome to stay as long as you need. No expectations. Just space." Megan thought about Clara's couch, about her checking account, about the envelope in her jacket pocket, still unopened, from an attorney who had been trying to reach her for 6 years. "Thank you," she said. She went to the guest room and sat on the edge of the bed in the dark for a while, not sleeping, not crying, just sitting. She took the envelope out of her jacket. She turned it over in her hands. Then she set it on the nightstand and lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling. Something in her chest had shifted. Not relief, it was too large and too complicated to be relief. More like the first breath after a very long hold. Like a door she had been leaning against for years had finally opened from the other side, and she'd been so used to pushing against it that she wasn't sure, yet, what it meant to be able to stop. She opened the envelope on the second morning. It contained a letter from an attorney named Richard Okafor, dated 6 years earlier, explaining that her biological father's estate had included a trust in her name, set up by her father's brother before his death, funded from the sale of his half of a small business he had co-owned, and that she was the named beneficiary. The trust had been held in escrow pending contact. She should call the number at the bottom of the letter. She sat with the letter for a long time. Then she got dressed and went to the kitchen, where Eleanor was already up and making coffee in the particular settled way of someone who lived in the apartment when she was in the city. She poured Megan a cup without being asked and set it on the counter. "Sleep?" Eleanor asked. "Not much. That's expected." Megan sat at the counter and drank the coffee and said after a while there was an envelope. From before. "A trust my biological father set up." Eleanor's expression was careful and not surprised. "Drew mentioned you might have more to work through than just him. He mentioned it to you? He mentioned that you'd told him about the adoption revelation and that you'd indicated there was something from an attorney." Eleanor sat across from her. "Did you read it?" "Just now. Megan set the letter on the counter. It's been waiting for 6 years. Carol kept it from me. Eleanor looked at the letter without touching it. That's hers to account for, she said. Not mine to comment on, except to say that I'm sorry you had to find it that way. They sat for a moment. I have questions, Megan said. For Drew. I want to ask them to him directly. He's in the study, Eleanor said. He's been up since 5. Drew was sitting at a desk when she came in, and he closed his laptop and turned his chair to face her with the full attention of someone who had been waiting and wasn't going to pretend he hadn't been. Okay, she said. She sat in the chair across from him. If I had asked you directly, in any of our conversations, who you were, would you have told me? He considered it. No, he said. Not until I was sure. Sure of what? That the connection was real. That I wasn't making another mistake in the other direction, seeing what I wanted to see instead of what was there. So you were evaluating me. I was. Yes, I was. I don't want to frame it as something more neutral than that. He looked at her steadily. I was also being evaluated by every interaction, every time you showed up and didn't ask for anything, every time you said something true that you had no reason to perform. I was learning whether I could trust my own judgment, because my judgment had been wrong before. Megan looked at her hands. Did you ever think about just not doing it? Living a normal life and accepting that some relationships might have a commercial dimension and working around it? Yes. For about 8 months after Claire. I dated 2 people, both of whom I liked, both of whom knew who I was from the start. He paused. With both of them, there was always something slightly managed about the relationship. Not deceptive, just calculated. Every conversation had a small awareness of context. I couldn't find my way past it. He leaned forward slightly. You were different from the first night, Megan. You bought me food because you looked at a human being and thought he was hungry. That was all. There was no calculation. I don't know if you understand how rare that is. I don't want to be rare, she said. I just wanted to give someone a granola bar. He was quiet for a moment. Then, unexpectedly, something shifted in his face. Genuine, unguarded. I know, he said. That's the whole thing. She looked at him. She looked at the desk and the closed laptop, and the way he was sitting, which was the same composed posture he'd had on every bench he'd ever sat on in her presence. Different clothes, same person. Was the poverty performance something you enjoyed? She asked. It was the question she'd been most afraid to ask. No, he said it without hesitation. Parts of it were unexpectedly clarifying. Parts of it were genuinely difficult. I have never slept outside in winter before. I don't recommend it. He met her eyes. I didn't enjoy the deception. I want to be direct about that. I justified it to myself, but that justification had a cost, and I was aware of the cost the whole time, especially after I met you. She sat with that. Eleanor appeared in the doorway with 2 more coffees and set them down and left without saying anything, which Megan appreciated. Later that afternoon, Eleanor found Megan in the guest room and knocked on the open door. Can I show you something? Eleanor said. She led Megan to the living room and picked up a framed photo from the bookshelf, a charity gala, full ballroom, dozens of people in formal wear. She pointed to Drew on the left side of the frame. He was standing beside a woman in a dark dress, both of them angled toward the camera, and he was smiling. Megan looked at the photo. That was 2.5 years ago, Eleanor said. 6 months before the relationship ended. I've spent a lot of time looking at that photo. She set it down. That is not what a man looks like when he is happy. That is what a man looks like when he has learned to do the right shape with his face. Megan looked at the photo for another moment. He was like that for almost 2 years, Eleanor said. Not unhappy in an obvious way. Just absent from himself. Like the real person had stepped back and let a very competent manager handle the events. She turned to Megan. Since he met you, he has been present. Not happy in a performed way, actually present. I noticed that because I hadn't seen it for a very long time. Megan set the photo down carefully on the shelf. I'm not asking you to make a decision, Eleanor said. I'm just giving you information I think you deserve to have. Megan nodded. She spent the rest of the afternoon sitting in the guest room with the attorney's letter and her phone, doing the research she should have done 6 years ago. Richard Okafor's firm was real. The trust was real. She called the number and left a message, and a woman called back within the hour, with a professional and unruffled manner, and confirmed that yes, the trust had been accumulating for 22 years, and she was welcome to come in at her earliest convenience. She sat with that for a while, then she went to find Drew. "Last question," she said. "For now." "Okay. The first time I bought you food, what were you thinking? Not about the plan, not about the experiment. What were you actually thinking?" He didn't hesitate. "I was thinking that you had $6 and you spent it on someone you didn't know, and you didn't make it into a moment. You didn't stand there waiting to feel good about it. You handed me the coffee and you looked at me like I was a person who was cold and hungry, and you went to fix the thing that you could fix." He paused. "I was thinking that I had been in 5 different cities in the last year, and I had spoken to dozens of people about dozens of things, and I had not once felt like I was talking to someone who was genuinely present. And you were, standing on the Riverwalk in a jacket that wasn't warm enough, with the last of your week's cash, being exactly who you are." She stood in the doorway of the study. "Okay," she said. She went back to the guest room. She lay down on the bed and looked at the ceiling. She did not have it figured out. She didn't forgive everything, and she wasn't going to pretend to. The deception was real, and it had cost something, and she wasn't going to set that aside because his explanation was good. But the person she knew, on the bench, in the diner, outside the police station, in this apartment, was the same person. She hadn't been wrong about him. She had been right about him in every way that mattered, and the method by which she'd come to know him was the part that needed to be held and turned over, not the person himself. She was not done being careful, but she was done being afraid of what she already knew. She would tell him tomorrow. Carol found out about the mortgage on a Friday. Jessica told her in the kitchen after dinner, which was the worst possible time. Carol had just finished cleaning up, which meant she was tired, and the house was at its quietest, which meant there was no ambient noise to absorb the information. She told her in a flat, quick voice, the way people deliver bad news they have been carrying for too long. She had signed over a second mortgage on the house 6 months ago to fund Chad's investment opportunity. The returns were supposed to start coming in after 90 days. She had been waiting for the deposit, and it had not arrived. And then, this week, there was the arrest, and now she was not sure the deposit was ever coming at all. Carol sat down in a kitchen chair. The house was the only substantial asset Carol had after 2 decades of careful, anxious management. Her first husband's life insurance had paid off the original mortgage and funded a college fund for the kids. Carol had refinanced once, years ago, for a renovation and paid that off. The house was hers, free and clear, and she had talked about it with the pride of someone who had built something real when everything else had been uncertain. The second mortgage was for $80,000. She sat in the chair for a very long time. Ryan came in from the back room where he'd been watching something on his laptop, registered the quality of the silence, and stood in the kitchen doorway. He looked at his mother. He looked at Jessica, who was looking at her phone. What happened?" he said. Carol told him. Ryan sat in the other kitchen chair. Jessica said, "Chad said it was guaranteed. He showed me the projections. He had investors, real investors. He had names." "Stop," Ryan said. He said it quietly, not angrily, with the specific tone of someone who has reached the end of a very long patience. "Jessica, stop. I was trying to help. I was trying to—" "You signed over the house," Ryan said. "That's not trying to help. That's—" He stopped. He looked at the table for a moment. Then he said, "Mom, you told her every week that money was the only thing that mattered. You told her what she was worth was what she could marry into. You told her the most important thing was to find someone who could provide." He paused. She was paying attention. Carol looked at him. "I'm not saying it's not Jessica's fault," Ryan said. "I'm saying you spent 26 years teaching her what to value, and she valued it. This is what that looks like." He pushed back his chair. "I'm going to look into what the legal options are." He left the kitchen. Jessica didn't say anything for a while. Then she put her phone face down on the table. "I was sure about him," she said, to no one in particular. Carol didn't respond. She was thinking about the news she'd seen 2 days ago. A brief segment on the business channel she sometimes left on in the background. about a federal fraud investigation into a Chicago-based investment operation. The operation's name hadn't sounded familiar at the time. She was trying to remember now whether Chad's fund had a name she'd actually held onto, or whether she had been satisfied by the LinkedIn and the wine and the practiced firmness of his handshake. She got up and went to the living room and turned on the television. The story was already running on the evening news. 47 investors, between $800,000 and $2 million total in committed funds. The operation was based in Chicago and had been active for approximately 14 months. Chad Weston had been arrested at O'Hare Airport, attempting to board a flight to Portugal. Federal charges included wire fraud, investment fraud, and obstruction. The reporter closed the segment with a brief mention of civil recovery proceedings. Carol sat on the couch with her hands in her lap. Ryan came back from his room with his laptop and showed her what he'd found. The mortgage company had sent 3 past due notices over the last 2 months to the address on file. Jessica had been intercepting the mail. The deadline on the current notice had passed 31 days ago. Carol looked at the notices. She looked at Jessica. She looked at the television, where the reporter had moved on to weather and was pointing at a map of the Great Lakes region. "I need to call Megan," she said. Ryan looked up. There was something in his expression, not cruelty, but something honest that he had been holding back for a long time. He said, "Mom, think about that before you do it. She's not your resource." He said it gently, which made it harder. "She's a person you spent 20 years making feel like she was a burden. I don't know if she owes you a phone call." "I'm her. You're not," Ryan said. And he said it the same way he'd said it before, without anger, just with the weight of a fact he'd been sitting on for a while. "You told her yourself. You're not her mother. She has no obligation to you." Carol sat with that. She called Megan anyway. The phone rang 4 times and went to voicemail. She didn't leave a message. She tried again the next morning. This time Megan picked up. "Carol," Megan, she had prepared a version of this sentence. It came out incomplete. "Things have gone badly here. With the house. With Chad." I know," Megan said. There was no satisfaction in her voice and no coldness. Just the measured tone of someone who had been expecting the call. "I need to talk to you." A pause. "Okay, not on the phone. I'll tell you where to come." She gave Carol an address Carol didn't recognize and said to come the next afternoon. Carol sat for a long time after hanging up. She looked around the house that was no longer hers. On the television in the background, a business segment was updating the Chad Weston story. There was new information about the scope of the fraud. One of the investors in the civil recovery case had contacted the U.S. Attorney's Office directly. There was a brief mention of an attorney representing several defrauded parties, working in coordination with a larger firm. The larger firm was Bancroft Capital. Carol leaned forward and turned up the volume. Bancroft Capital. She knew the name. Everyone in Chicago knew the name. In the way you knew the names of firms, that word large enough to be in the background of any financial story. She had heard it. She could not have said 36 hours ago why it should mean anything to her. She sat with the television on and the mortgage notices on the coffee table and the particular silence of a house where something had finally run out. She was going to see Megan tomorrow. She had no idea yet what she was going to walk into. On the 5th day, Megan told Drew she needed to decide. She had been at the Bancroft apartment for 5 days, and they had settled into a careful arrangement. She used the guest room. She came and went according to her own schedule. She attended her classes and covered her shifts because the scholarship still had obligations, and so did the barista job, which she hadn't formally quit even though Carol's house and the life around it had fallen away. She ate meals with Eleanor when Eleanor was in the city, which was most days. She spoke to Drew in the evenings in the study or the kitchen, in the same measured cadences they'd developed over weeks of bench conversations. She was not pretending things were resolved. She was also not hiding from the apartment. On the 5th morning, she called Richard Okafor's firm and made an appointment for the following week. She sat afterward in the guest room and thought about the trust, which was real and had been accumulating for 22 years and was more money than she had ever been adjacent to. She thought about men to have a biological family that had tried to provide for her after they were gone, and had not been able to tell her about it. She thought about the envelope sitting on her nightstand, the handwriting on the front that she now knew was Richard Okafor's paralegal. She thought about a lot of things. In the evening, she found Drew in the kitchen, making coffee, and she sat at the counter and said, "I need to decide." He turned from the coffee maker. He didn't pretend not to know what she meant. "Okay," he said. "Not whether to forgive you exactly," she said. "That's not." She paused, finding the precision. "The deception is real, and I'm not going to perform being over it faster than I actually am. But I've been sitting with it, and I know the difference between a wound that's going to change how I see something fundamentally and a wound that's going to heal if I let. And I think I know which one this is." He sat across from her at the counter. "What I need to decide," she said, "is whether I trust what I know about you. Not the circumstance, not the method. You, the person." She looked at him directly. "And when I ask myself that, the answer is yes, I know you. I knew you on the bench, and I knew you at the urgent care, and I knew you outside that police station. That person is real, and I'm not willing to dismiss him because the address on the paperwork is different than I thought." Drew was quiet. "That doesn't mean I'm done asking questions," she said, "or that I'm going to stop being careful. I'm always going to be careful." "I know," he said, "and if you ever—" She stopped. "I need you to understand that I'm not a test subject. I am not someone you evaluated and passed. I'm a person who made real choices based on what I believed was real, and those choices were real regardless of your circumstances, and I need you to hold that with some weight." "I do," he said. "I have been. I know what it cost you." She nodded. They sat for a moment in the kitchen, the coffee maker finishing its cycle. The city outside the window going on in the way it always went on. "I want to keep going," she said. "Whatever this is, I want to see what it actually is when both of us are in it as ourselves." "So do I," he said. Simple and direct, the way he always said things. "Good," she said. In the evening, they walked. It wasn't planned. She said she needed air, and he said he'd come. And they went out into the city with no particular direction, moving through the Gold Coast toward the lakefront, and it was cold. But the wind had settled, and the lights on the water were the particular shimmer that Lake Michigan produced on nights when it was clear. She didn't say much. Neither did he. There was a companionable quality to the silence that was different from the careful silences they'd had in the apartment over the last 5 days. Those had been silences where something was being held in reserve. This one was just two people walking and not needing to fill it. They came down along the riverwalk. She recognized where she was before she saw the bench, the bend in the path, the particular angle of the food cart setup, the bridge in the near distance. She slowed. The bench was empty. It was the same one. She was almost certain. She stopped. Drew stopped beside her. She looked at the bench for a moment, the cold, ordinary wood, the public space where anyone sat. The place where she had looked at a man sitting still in the November dark and made a calculation that had cost her everything she thought she had, and given her everything she didn't know she needed. "You must have been cold," she said. He looked at the bench, too. "The first few nights were genuinely difficult," he said. "I was not prepared for the wind off the lake." He paused. "I kept thinking about leaving, going back upstairs, calling the whole thing off." "Why didn't you?" "Because I hadn't found what I came looking for yet." He looked at her. "And then you came around the corner with $6 bar and a granola bar, and I stopped thinking about leaving." She looked at him. "You have no idea," he said, "how much warmer it got." She looked back at the bench. The water moved. Someone jogger passed. Chicago carried on in all directions. She thought about Carol's house, where she had not been chosen. She thought about the envelope, where someone had tried to give her something from beyond the grave. She thought about this man who had gone to extraordinary lengths to find something ordinary, the chance to be known for himself, and had found her instead, by accident, or by whatever passes for accident in the arrangement of things. She was not naive. She was going into whatever this was with clear eyes and a record of who she was. She was bringing all of herself. The instincts Carol had called foolish. The kindness Jessica had called self-destructive. The capacity for presence that she had always had, and never found a place for. She was bringing it all. She was going to see what happened. "Come on," she said. "It's cold." They walked back along the Riverwalk together, and the city was enormous and indifferent, and she was, for the first time in a very long time, exactly where she wanted to be. They came on a Saturday afternoon, which Megan had not expected, but probably should have. She was in the building's lobby when she saw them through the glass doors. Carol first, in the good coat again, and Jessica beside her, and Ryan a half step behind both of them, with the posture of someone who was there, because he decided to be, rather than because he was supposed to be. Carol was holding what looked like a folder of papers. Jessica looked like she hadn't slept. Megan went outside. She didn't invite them in. She had decided this the night before, when she'd been lying in the guest room, thinking through the versions of how this might go. Inside was Drew's space. Inside was Eleanor's kitchen. Inside was the particular quiet of a place where someone had chosen her, and she had chosen back, and she was not going to bring Carol's version of the world through that door. She met them on the sidewalk. It was cold. November had not improved, and the Gold Coast street was doing its usual Saturday afternoon business muss around them. "Megan," Carol said. "Carol." She waited. Carol opened the folder, which contained the mortgage notice and what looked like a notice from the mortgage servicer about the foreclosure timeline. She held it out. Megan looked at the papers but didn't take them. "The house is going to go into foreclosure by the end of the month unless—" Carol stopped, restarted. "I need help, Megan. I don't have the resources to." "I know," Megan said. "I know what's happening with this house. I'm not asking you to fix it. I'm going to give you something," Megan said. "It's a name and a number." She took her phone out and pulled up the Notes app, where she'd typed the information 2 days ago, and she read it aloud. A housing assistance nonprofit that operated in Carol's zip code and provided emergency support for homeowners facing foreclosure, including access to HUD-certified counselors and short-term assistance programs. She gave Carol the name and number twice. Carol stared at her. "That's it?" Jessica said. Her voice had a crack in it. "That's the practical help I can offer," Megan said. She was not cold. She was not performing patience. She was simply being direct. "The nonprofit is real. I've called and spoken to someone there. They have a counselor available Monday mornings without appointment." "We're not," Carol started. "I'm not able to absorb this crisis," Megan said. "I want to be honest about that. Not because I don't care what happens to you, but because I spent 20 years being the person in this family who absorbed things that weren't mine to absorb, and I'm not doing it anymore." The silence on the sidewalk had a particular quality. Ryan stepped forward, slightly apart from Carol and Jessica. He was not carrying the folder. He was not performing anything, said, "I'm sorry, Megan." She looked at him. "For not saying anything." He said, "For years. I watched what happened in that house, and I didn't say anything because it was easier not to." He met her eyes. "I'm sorry." She nodded. "I know," she said. "Thank you." He stepped back. Carol was looking at the ground near her feet. Something was happening in her face, not quite grief, not quite shame, something between the two that she was working to keep from being visible and failing. "I know I have no right to ask you for anything," Carol said finally. It came out quietly, without the performance she usually brought to difficult conversations. "I know that. I didn't know where else to turn." "I know," Megan said. "That's why I gave you the number." A noise from somewhere nearby, a notification on someone's phone, a shop door opening, and then Megan was aware of movement behind her to her left, where a boutique with a large front window had a television visible through the glass playing the local midday news. The sound was off, but the Chiron was running, and a graphic in the upper right corner of the screen showed a photo. She heard Carol make a sound, a short, involuntary sound, like something pressing out. She turned to see what Carol was looking at. On the television screen, in the easy graphic format of a business segment, a photo. Two people at a press event, both facing the camera. Drew, in a suit that fit him the way clothes fit people who don't have to think about it, and beside him, her hand in his, looking directly at the camera with the particular composure of someone who had recently decided to stop being afraid of things, Megan. The Chiron read, "Bancroft Capital CEO Andrew Bancroft announces engagement to Megan Hayes." She had known the announcement was going out today. Drew's communications team had handled it. She had looked at the photo and said yes, that was fine. She had not thought about where she would be standing when Carol saw it. Carol looked at the photograph for a long time. Then she looked at Megan. Then she looked at the building behind her, the doormen visible through the glass, the lobby she had not been invited into. Something moved across Carol's face that Megan could not entirely name. It was not simple. It was layered in a way that suggested a great many things arriving at once. The recognition of who Drew was, the calculation of what that meant, the memory of every word she had said about him over the course of 6 weeks, and what those words looked like now. The photograph of Megan standing beside him as his equal in her own right, chosen. It was the look of someone seeing clearly, finally, and finding the view costly. "I'll call the number," Carol said. "Good," Megan said. There was nothing more to say, and Megan had said it, and she stood on the sidewalk and watched Carol fold the mortgage papers back into the folder with careful, controlled hands, and watched Jessica turn away toward the street, and watched Ryan give Megan one last nod, quiet and honest, before following his mother. She stood on the sidewalk until they had turned the corner and were gone. Then she went back inside. Drew was in the lobby, having not been there when she went out. He had his jacket on and his hands in his pockets, and he looked at her with the particular expression she had come to know well. "How did it go?" he said. "I gave her the nonprofit number," she said. "And?" She thought about Carol's face on the sidewalk, the recognition arriving all at once. "I think she understood," she said. "Not everything, but enough." He nodded. She looked at him in the lobby of his building, in the city where she had spent 24 years being just slightly outside the frame, and felt, with a clarity that was not performed and not dramatic, that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Not because of the building, not because of his name on the announcement chyron, because of who she had been on a cold Tuesday night on the Riverwalk, and because that person had turned out to be someone worth choosing. "Come on," she said. "Eleanor's making dinner." He held the elevator door. She went in. 3 months later, the engagement dinner was held at a restaurant on the north side that Eleanor had chosen for its noise level, high enough to make conversation feel private, low enough to hear the person across from you. It was a Wednesday, which seemed right. The night it started had been a Tuesday. Megan had been back in her nursing program full-time for 6 weeks, having renegotiated the scholarship administration with a patience and precision she had not known she possessed until she needed to. The trust from Richard Okafor's office had cleared. 22 years of accumulation, enough to cover tuition and housing, and the kind of breathing room she had not had since she understood money as a concept. She had not told anyone except Drew what it amounted to. He had listened and said nothing for a moment, and then said, "What do you want to do with it?" She had told him. The foundation was Drew's idea initially, and then it was hers more than his. He had said, "I want to build something with you," she had said. "I know what I want to build." She had come to the first planning meeting with a 2-page outline of services, emergency grants for working students facing unexpected crises, transitional housing support for people navigating between street services, and stable housing, modeled on the things she had wanted and not had, and watched other people want and not have. Drew's name opened the rooms where funding was decided. Her outline was what happened in those rooms. She had kept the barista job until the end of October. She had not hated it when she left. Ryan came to the dinner. He sat near the end of the long table and talked to Marcus Bancroft about something for 45 minutes and seemed genuine about it. She had called him the week after the sidewalk conversation, and he had answered, and they had talked for a long time about what the house had been, and what it had cost both of them, and what they both wanted now. He was looking for work. He was living with a college friend. He was, for the first time in years, making decisions that were his own. Carol and Jessica were at the far end of the restaurant, near the entrance, seated at a small table for 2 that had been reserved in their names. Megan had done this, had made the reservation, had left their names, had not told Drew until 2 days before. He had asked her if she was sure. She had said yes. She went to them before the main course. Carol had aged something in 3 months. Not dramatically, Carol was always composed, but there was something in her face that had settled differently, like a person who had stopped holding a position they'd been maintaining through effort alone. Jessica was thinner. They were both dressed well, because that was what Carol did, even when everything else was uncertain. "Thank you for coming," Megan said. Carol said, "Thank you for the reservation." A pause. The restaurant noise moved around them. Megan sat down across from Carol. She had decided what she wanted to say, and she had decided to say it plainly, without ceremony, because that was how she did things. "I forgive you," she said. "Not because you earned it, and not because I need you to know it, but because I've been carrying something heavy for a long time and I don't want to carry it anymore. It's not your absolution, it's mine." She looked at Carol steadily. "I've moved on. My life is mine now in a way it never was. I'm going to keep living it." Carol looked at her. Something moved across her face, something honest and painful, not performed. "I know I failed you," Carol said. "It came out with difficulty. I know what I did, and I've known it for a long time. I told myself it was complicated. It wasn't, really." Megan nodded. "I'm sorry," Carol said. "I know," Megan said. She stood. She looked at Jessica. Jessica looked back at her with an expression that was not quite remorse and not quite something else. Something in the process of becoming, maybe, that would take more time than a dinner to resolve. "Good luck," Megan said to both of them. She went back to her table. Drew was watching her from across the room. He didn't ask, when she sat down, what had been said. He poured her water and leaned slightly toward her and said, "How are you?" "I'm good," she said, and meant it, and found the meaning of it simple and real, and without any of the complications she'd spent years attaching to the word good whenever someone asked. After dinner, they stood on the sidewalk outside, while the group dispersed in cabs and rideshares. Eleanor hugged her and said, "You're something, you know that?" And Megan laughed and said she was working on understanding what. Marcus shook Drew's hand and hugged Megan and said, "Wednesday was a good choice," and walked off toward their car. Ryan said goodbye separately, quietly, with the ease of someone who had found a version of himself he could actually stand to live with. Megan said, "Let me know how the job search goes." He said he would. Then it was just the two of them on the sidewalk, the city doing what it always did, walk. Drew said. "Obviously," she said. They went north and eventually turned toward the lakefront, because that was where they always ended up when they walked without a destination. The lake in February was severe and enormous and indifferent, and she had always loved it for those qualities. She pulled her coat tighter. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yes. When you were on the bench, the very first night, before I came around the corner, what were you thinking about?" He was quiet for a step or two. "I was thinking I was going to give it one more week," he said. "I'd been out there for almost 6 weeks, and I hadn't found anything I was looking for, and I was starting to think maybe my mother had been right about the sabbatical, and wrong about the dramatic version of it." He glanced at her. "And then you came around the corner." She looked at the water. "I still want to finish nursing school," she said. "I know, and I want to run the foundation properly. Not as a vanity project, as an actual operation with outcomes and accountability. I know that too," he said. "I'm not going to turn into someone I'm not just because the address changed. I know," he said. "That's the only reason the address is worth anything." She looked at him. He looked back at her, steady as always, present as always. The same person he'd been on the bench in November, which turned out to be exactly who he was all along. She had known him. She had been right about him from the beginning, in the dark near the Riverwalk with $6 and a granola bar, and no reason to stop except that she was herself. That was the whole story. "Come on," she said. "It's cold." He laughed, a real laugh, easy and unguarded, and they turned away from the water and walked back into the city together, and the night was cold and enormous and full of everything still ahead of them. If you've been moved by Megan's story, share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to know what stayed with you. More stories like this one are coming, and we'll see you next time.